Hello? In emergency medicine, there is an admonition. Think fast, and then think again. A real game changer has forced us to think again about the climate threat. It's not your grandfather's global warming, not anymore. That's all true, and it is indeed getting worse, but extreme weather is now the bigger problem, the much more immediate threat. Temperature and sea level may continue to creep upward, but extreme weather, as I will show you, has been growing in leaps and bounds. Here I'm going to discuss what to do about it. I'm not a climate scientist per se, but a medical school professor, which leads me to frame my analysis of the problem much like an emergency medicine physician would do. I'm a PhD neurophysiologist working on brain size, and that's how climate change caught my attention. I've spent much of my life talking about how the human brain got to be so big, so versatile, and how all this happened so quickly. Back about 1982, evolutionary biologists like Stephen Jay Gould told me that any big brain enlargement occurring as rapidly as ours did was likely driven by climate change. So I started paying close attention to abrupt climate changes of the past, looking for a climate hook that might somehow ratchet up brain size. I wasn't interested in future climate like global warming, not back then. It sort of seemed so next century. But the next century arrived 2 decades later, and following that 2003 mega heat wave in Europe, the one that killed 100 times as many people as the big heat waves of the 20th century, I finally got the message. I tuned in to 21st century climate problems as well as those of 2 million years ago. The climate scientists are mostly branches of applied physics. I could follow along because I was a physics major, indeed had a year as a graduate teaching assistant in physics. Then I got a PhD in biophysics and physiology at the University of Washington in Seattle and joined its neurosurgery faculty in 1966. Later, I taught undergraduate biology and then joined the faculty of psychiatry and behavioral sciences. I seem to be an academic generalist rather than in an age of specialists. My friends, the academic neurosurgeons, mostly knew how to think like basic scientists. But I came to realize PhD basic scientists like me, and that included the various climate scientists I was getting to know, usually did not know how physicians think, especially when they are faced with an urgent situation, where the patient can die if one's actions are too little too late. Other medical school professors teach medical students about think fast and then think again, but I can tell you about it. You'll shortly see why their way of thinking is so important for altering our views about global warming and climate change. Those terms are so yesterday. Not wrong, just far too abstract for communicating the current situation and its urgency. But before I turn and run through a medical focused thinking scenario featuring climate, there are 3 topics to cover first. First, extreme weather events, why there are so many of them. Second, the kinks in the jet stream that seem to be behind most of the new extreme weather. And third, a few misconceptions that regularly get in the way of effective climate action. I'm afraid that a little creative destruction is now needed. First, extreme weather. I'm going to stick to the sorts that can be easily quantified, such as heat wave deaths, deluge, and severe windstorm damage. But many tabulations also include wildfires, dry episodes in the growing season, as well as crop damage from hailstorms. The big Chicago heat wave in 1995 killed 739 people. That many deaths used to be considered a huge heat wave back in the 20th century. The 2003 mega heat wave centered near Paris killed 70,000 people. I mean, that's 100 times more than in Chicago. We sort of hoped this was a one-off event, but the 2010 mega heat wave centered near Moscow killed 56,000 people, just 7 years after that. Paired with it was a deluge to the south that flooded 1/4 of Pakistan, killing another 2,000 people. When will North America get hit? Are we prepared? That I can answer, no. We must learn to think in terms of extreme weather, because that's what has been taking over our future prospects in a big way. It's what could kill many of our friends and family within the next 20-odd years. In the past 15 years, the extreme weather situation has worsened dramatically. The trend is very worrying. You need to take that extreme weather trend into account when planning your life and protecting your children. This is not a drill. The mega heat waves and the redoubled numbers of severe storms, bad as they are not the biggest threat. Extreme weather can shake civilization badly when there are repeated hits on agriculture. It only takes a single bad year when only enough food can be grown to support, say, half of the world's population. There are few countries with enough stored food to survive that, not without civil wars breaking out over sharing the remainder. That is the sort of thing that leads to genocides. If we don't act effectively, a horrendous population crash is in our future, a downsizing implemented by war, famine, epidemics, and genocides. Well, deep breaths. That's the bad news. I'll unpack it for you presently. Then I'll move on to what we can do about the situation. Having watched the climate science unfold for 35 years, I can give you a risk assessment, an executive summary of the mess we're in, including what our leadership must do to get us out of the danger zone in time. I can tell you what climate scientists now know about the stalled and souped up extreme weather of the past 15 years. I can tell you what that says about an effective counter move. Whatever we do needs to be big enough and quick enough to clean up most of that thick CO2 blanket overhead. And do it by the year 2040 at the latest. Finish it by then. A massive CO2 cleanup is what it takes to retreat from the impending climate chaos. It is what would give us a chance to restore climate stability. The 2040 deadline is my estimate, but in a few minutes you should be able to judge for yourselves our new level of risk and what priorities should be associated with it. The temperature contrast between land and ocean has been changing because the land heats up 2.5 times faster than does the surface of the ocean. Furthermore, the Arctic has been overheating twice as rapidly as the adjacent continents, 5 times faster than the average ocean surface. This uneven heating of our planet has changed how fast winds blow and where they deliver the ocean moisture on land. The biggest players in extreme weather are the hairpin turns in our largest river of air, the jet stream. The warming of the Arctic has slowed the polar jet stream. Long loopy meanders have developed along its path now. Loopy meanders have been allowing a finger of Arctic air to reach down into the subtropics. Worse, they occasionally allow a finger of warm air up north to unfreeze the North Pole in the middle of winter. This is mind-boggling, yet it happened at midnight Sunday, February 25th this year. Not in summer, but in the dead of winter, a winter heat wave at the North Pole. The long loops also serve as roadblocks to stall the usual weather systems that move east across the continents. We used to be able to count on the weather, whatever it was, being different the next week. Not anymore. As the annual number of pathological weather episodes keeps doubling, nothing will be predictable anymore for agriculture. That's what I mean by climate chaos. We've always had extreme weather in small amounts. Now we have an additional source of mega weather, one that hits more and more often. The enlarged waves in the jet stream, especially those hairpin turns, are what have set up acute climate attacks in the form of windstorms, droughts, deluges, Arctic outbreaks, mega heat waves. This new extreme weather has been arriving rapidly. That big 2003 heat wave killed 100 times as many people as earlier ones did. There were no intermediate stops at 5 times as many or 40 times as many, just straight to 100 times as many fatalities as huge heat waves of the 20th century. And the mega of 2003 wasn't a one-off event, as we learned 7 years later. The next time you hear someone talking of gradual climate change, remind them of leaps and bounds. A mega heat wave can happen in North America as well, and probably will, unless we back out of the danger zone. It's not that everything you know about proposed climate action is wrong, it's just that much of it won't help now that the future has been taken over by the prospects for more and more extreme weather. They have preempted the former situation. The climate models produce numbers that assume gradual change. Computers are not yet powerful enough to handle whiplash behaviors. They do not tell us how much time we have left before civilization collapses. So much for kinks in extreme weather. Now I need to clear away some misconceptions about what constitutes effective action, why what we are doing won't work. First misconception, we have been treating our excess CO2 as an air pollution problem. Reduced emissions certainly works for smog and diesel particulate pollution, but greenhouse gases are not merely air pollution that goes away once it rains. We have tried to reduce emissions for 40 years, and it hasn't done the job that needed doing, as can be judged from the CO2 rising faster and faster. The yearly bump up is now 4 times larger than it was 50 years ago. This is not progress. The second misconception concerns before and after. We have often confused actions that prevent the problem, such as reduced emissions, with actions that make the existing problem go away, such as a cleanup. The third, even bigger misconception is our frequent confusion of a rate with its associated accumulation. They are not the same thing. If one confused miles per hour, a rate, with miles traveled, the accumulation it produces, you'd step in and straighten them out. 30 miles an hour does not equal 30 miles, right? If they confuse the budget deficit, an annual rate, with the national debt, its accumulation over time, you'd step in and straighten them out. If someone confused fossil fuel emissions, another annual rate, with the excess CO2 already in the sky, its accumulation over many years, I hope you'd step in and straighten them out, even if it's a teacher or a governor speaking. Someone once shortened emissions per year to mere emissions, encouraging much such confusion. Here's a more graphic example. Our focus on reducing emissions has resulted in a fundamental misunderstanding of our climate problem, one akin to confusing the faucet with the tub. Emissions per year is the metaphorical faucet setting. which we have been trying to tweak. The annual amount of CO2 that is added to the accumulation in our metaphorical bathtub. But it's the accumulation there that drives the overheating and the killer weather. It is already in the tub. Too much is disaster. As 15 years of excess extreme weather shows us, the accumulation of CO2 is already way too high. Besides the faucet in the tub, there is a missing player, the drain. This drain does not work very well. Do you know how long it takes for this CO2 tub to drain? I mean, on its own after the faucet is turned off. So let's have a show of hands. Is today's CO2 addition gone in a week, as is smog? Is today's CO2 addition gone by the end of next year? Is it gone in a decade or two? Gone in a century? Any takers for 1,000 years? Going, gone, you got it. It indeed takes 1,000 years for the natural drain to flush the CO2 excess. Most greenhouse gases are gone in several decades, but not the major greenhouse gas, CO2. Note that reducing our annual emissions by half, could we do it, won't change the extreme weather. During the next few decades, when it's so important to avoid destroying civilization, doubling down on emissions reduction will not do the job. I'm all in favor of zero emissions for other reasons, but even if one succeeds in turning off the fossil fuel faucet, the prior accumulation does not go away. Therefore, symptoms like extreme weather, which depend on the accumulation, will keep battering us. We need to set our sights higher than mere zero emissions. Note also that our metaphorical tub is already full enough that it is unsafe for the next generation to set in. That's the second missing element here, the baby in the bathtub. One does not go away to answer the doorbell, leaving baby alone in shoulder-high water, because our metaphorical baby could accidentally drown. We now need the equivalent of a bucket brigade to the nearest functional drain. The big extreme weather threats will not go away, not with any of our current climate intervention strategies, not until we draw down the excess CO2. They will just get worse, and if we are to judge from the last 15 years, they could take big leaps in destruction rather than creeping along a little worse every year. To intervene effectively, we've got to get the idea out of our heads that doubling down on emission reductions still constitutes effective action. Not anymore. A game changer, one with sharp teeth, is already on stage. It's too bad that this isn't a game with that kind of game changer. I'm trying to prepare you for that conversation in the elevator or around a kitchen table, when planet-saving talk turns to improving gas mileage, or carbon taxes, or generating electricity with biofuel. You'll need to explain why we must now step up our game in a big way. Our old way of thinking and action is not an intervention at all. We need to change our way of thinking about our predicament given those 21st century extreme weather game changers. So far, we have lacked any effective focus on what to do about fixing our climate. But I have an example for you showing how the emergency pros go about their work, how they focus, a technique you probably did not see when watching ER or House MD on television. We medical school professors teach MDs an organized way of thinking, a focused approach to decision making, essential when dealing with a life-threatening situation. Physicians first consider the presenting symptoms. Here, that's the acute aspects of climate disease. So different from the overheating and sea level rise creeping up on us from the chronic aspect of climate disease. The acute problems are mostly coming from weather that lingers too long before finally moving on. That causes heat waves and Arctic outbreaks, deluge and drought. Secondly, one asks about the patient's health history. Here, noting such events as those rain bombs, mega heat waves, Arctic warming, and the jet stream's history of wind strength. The acute extreme weather attacks began happening, I would judge, between 1994 and 2003. By 2010, they were dangerously accelerating. In the US, we are now averaging 4 times as many billion-dollar severe storms each year as before 2007. I'm sure you've noticed the problem, but did you realize it had quadrupled in the last 10 years? This progression of trouble is now occurring by leaps, not creeps. Next comes the physical exam. The physician carefully looks for things that the patient didn't mention. Perhaps a low fever, capable of suddenly spiking. An experienced physician, by this point, can then usually make a list of possible diagnoses. It's called the differential, and get lab tests started. Lab tests that will hopefully narrow down the list. Fifth, the prior steps lead us to a story that serves as a tentative diagnosis of what's going on. Here, climate scientists have discovered that frequent hairpin turns of the jet stream are serving as a new frequent source of extreme weather. We then go looking for more subtle indications that might confirm the diagnosis. Whether it lingers too long explains those mega heat waves in 2003 and 2010. The jet stream kinks explain the new surge in both deluge and drought events. The diagnosis explains how often we now see interdigitating fingers of Arctic chill with going down into the subtropics and winter heat waves that thaw the North Pole simultaneously. It explains those spin-offs when the hairpin turn starts to shorten, a left behind segment of jet stream then spins in a circle called a cutoff high or cutoff low. As it spins down over a week or more, it may set atop the same real estate, blocking relief from moving in. Finally, climate scientists have a coherent explanation that covers all sorts of extreme weather details. It is a natural fit. That's what we mean in medicine by a diagnosis. The disorder or disease has been ID'd. Ninth, the prognosis. We remind ourselves of the future course of this now identified disease if it is treated ineffectively. In other words, too little, too late. In this case, that future prospect is climate chaos coming up, food supply going down, and perhaps dropping suddenly down. That's the prognosis, what happens if we do nothing or too little or too late. Exactly the current trajectory we are on now. There are too many people who do not take the extreme weather threat seriously. For example, are we Americans increasing our grain reserves in case we get hit like Russia did in 2010, losing a third of their crop? No. Are we making sure that our supply of electricity for residential air conditioners doesn't fail during a heat wave? Nope. Are we doing anything to back out of the danger zone? No. I mean, where are our leaders in this matter? Now imagine growing seasons becoming so unpredictable that a second crop rarely succeeds, and even the main crop is often stunted. When agriculture productivity drops so dramatically, and other places are in trouble at the same time, you cannot just import food from elsewhere. In the past, such a situation has often triggered famine, civil disorder, resource wars, and genocides. Population downsizing is horrendous. Again, we do not want to go there. And with refugees on the move, there are also disease epidemics from the loss of standard public health measures, as when refugees rent soiled clothing in a pond that will provide drinking water for next week's group of climate refugees following the same road. Anyone expecting to be alive in 2040 needs to be very concerned. Ineffectively treated, climate chaos is likely to kill many of our friends and family, perhaps even us, perhaps even civilization itself, humanity's prime achievement of the last 5,000 years. But the trip to hell isn't obligatory. There are options remaining. Let us talk about treatments that might avoid that prognosis. Some equivalents to my metaphorical bucket brigade for that bathtub accumulation. In medicine, preventive measures such as emissions reduction are usually ineffective once an acute disease has begun. So once you have a tooth abscess, merely prescribing better brushing and flossing isn't going to do the job. That's now where we are with emissions reduction, I'm sorry to say. However desirable for the long run, emissions reduction can no longer do the job that needs doing, which is short run. This is not a eulogy. This is a call to action. We haven't even begun to fight, and so this is not the time for despair. It is the time to focus, something most leaders are not yet doing. We cannot just replace them. That would take decades. They are deeply entrenched, and time is now too short. Wars could happen in the meantime, distracting everyone. We must instead get our existing leaders to embrace effective action, such as CO2 capture and sink that treats both the acute and the chronic climate disease. I would hate to have led you through so many downers if I didn't have something promising to say about how to implement a repair project, one that is big, quick, and also sufficiently surefire to be invulnerable to resource raids during food shortages, invulnerable to mega weather, even invulnerable to the usual wars. There is one model for such a project. It all sounds familiar to most farmers because it's a familiar farming technique. It features two pumps in a push-pull arrangement. There are several versions for how to power the pumps. I've selected the one that is the easiest one to illustrate, namely windmills. Details for this model project: a push-pull pump for capture and sink, located out on the ocean's continental shelf, are at CO2Foundation.org. This model has most of the right features and is simple enough to illustrate the scope that a workable plan would need. The push-pull pump operates much like the agricultural practice of occasionally plowing under a newly grown cover crop, typically beans, at the end of the summer, in order to replenish the soil's supply of nitrogen. What farmers still do if they cannot afford to buy fertilizer. The process merely mimics two natural processes: ocean upwelling of nutrients and ocean downwelling of plankton-laden plankton-laden surface waters in giant whirlpools. Algae, those teeny little green plants in the ocean, capture the carbon in CO2 via photosynthesis in order to build organic carbon molecules that will store energy and build things. The O2 they spin off provides half the oxygen that we breathe. The little plant frequently splits in two, yielding a second cell, before that cell can die a week later, and its organic carbon molecules can revert to CO2 in the following week or two. We can quickly sink it into the ocean depths, where the cell's carbon will stay for thousands of years before it gets a chance to return to the atmosphere as CO2. We run the pushdown pump with wind or wave power. Unlike the crops we grow on land, algae can double their numbers in less than a day, allowing us to harvest huge amounts 24/7, not just once at the end of the growing season. Nothing on land can compete with plankton farms in the big and quick departments. Even if we didn't fertilize to increase plankton production, sinking surface waters should be a powerful technique because of all the dissolved organic carbon suspended in it, just waiting for its chance to become CO2 again. 99.5% of the organic carbon molecules in surface waters are not inside living cells, but in the remains of dead ones, organic debris that stays suspended rather than settling into the depths. We call it dissolved organic carbon, DOC. How about fertilizing to keep plankton growing just as fast as we can sink it? It would be nice to have a plankton bloom that kept blooming year-round. We can get phosphates and other essential nutrients locally if we pick the right sites for our farms. No delivery trucks needed. Enter the second pump to pull up essential nutrients from just below the wind-mixed surface layer of the ocean. This deeper layer is where nutrients typically accumulate as particle-sized stuff rains down from a bloom above. That's the way we fertilize more growth and then take the new stuff out of circulation. One pump for push, another for pull. The whole project is a push-pull pumping arrangement, rather like those used in dialysis machines invented for cleaning the blood in kidney failure. One advantage of low-cost push-pull pumps is that the pumps merely augment natural up and downwelling ocean processes. Oceanographers already understand many of their side effects. The fishing fleets will want more and more of the farms with cable-free fishing lanes through their middle. Perhaps they will help pay for it. To meet that 2040 deadline, which may prevent the worst extreme weather tipping points, my timeline allows about 2 years to get Congress to give the Pentagon its marching orders and deadlines. I briefed a room full of admirals and generals in advance of my 1998 cover story in the Atlantic on climate instability. The Pentagon is the only organization large enough to do this capture and sink project in a timely manner. And the Pentagon already takes climate disruption seriously. Then another 2 years for the assembled experts to design multiple prototype pumps and farm layouts, followed by 3 years of simultaneous field trials, evaluations, and design improvements. Then comes production and deployment at the rate of adding 8 gigatons of carbon per year capture and sink capacity, each year for the next 5 years. Then 10 years of production flat out at 40 gigatons of carbon per year sunk ought to do the job of taking the needed 500 gigatons of carbon out of circulation by the year 2040. But remember, the cool down does not begin until the continuing emissions of CO2, the ones we haven't been able to reduce. We have to be able to counter them at the rate of about 10 gigatons of carbon annually, subtract off them. On my schedule, that would be accomplished in 2027. So extreme weather will get worse for about a decade before our capture and sink project begins to draw down the excess CO2 and cool us off. We will, however, need to allow for some weather disasters interrupting our plans. Longer time lags, whether from wars or indecisive leaders, could be fatal. Thus, we are forced to think big projects that are also quick and sure to work. No more half measures or window dressing disguising the lack of meaningful progress. For 20 years, researchers and entrepreneurs have tried to make progress on carbon removal. We've had iron filing fertilization of plankton blooms. We have seen clever ocean pipes and pumps designed. Floating wind farms for generating power have come along. We need only simplify them back to the original windmill purpose of pumping water instead. We need enough design work to try field trials for a half dozen such methods, all at the same time, over the next 5 years. Because with extreme weather, time is now of the essence. It is not your grandfather's global warming back when there was a centuries-long time horizon for trouble appearing. Our time horizon is now shrunk to several decades. To repeat, our treatment must be big enough and quick enough, and because we only have one planet to lose, it has to be surefire. The next carbon dioxide removal proposal that you read about, just try applying the 3 big, quick, surefire criteria to it. None of the current ones suggest an ability to meet even a single one of those 3 criteria. Success will require all 3, so we had better get moving. It's going to be like preparing for a great war already looming on the horizon. 20 years to completion, and quicker is better to ensure that we pop out of our present too little, too late trajectory in time. As an emergency medicine, there's not likely to be a second chance. So much for the science background and the practical aspects. Let me conclude with leadership and persuasion. The mental discipline that we medical school professors teach physicians is especially important to emergency medicine doctors who often encounter situations that might prove rapidly fatal. Fortunately, some senior military officers are taught something similar. Our scientific and political leaders now need to develop a similar mental discipline. Persuasion. Note that we can almost retire those problematic terms, global warming and climate change, which scientists used decades ago when accurately predicting what would happen. They are now terms that are too general, too abstract, and occasionally too taboo. In contrast, extreme weather has teeth and it looms. Even those accustomed to treating climate as a taboo word, and environmentalists as a nuisance, can recognize extreme weather as a bigger and bigger crisis. It is a future that has already arrived. Emphatic surprises atop the usual creep up in temperature, in sea level, and in expansion of the tropics. While it is always a good idea to keep the long run in mind, one must survive the short run to benefit from those long run clever improvements we've been making in fuels and efficiencies. The new top priority is doing something effective to prevent even more extreme weather, drought and deluge, unseasonable freezes and rain bombs, and mega heat waves that can suddenly cut the food supply in half, while poaching the brains of a great many people. We now find ourselves in a situation much like arming for a great war, doing what must be done regardless of cost and convenience. At the beginning of World War II, Americans heard the metaphor of a 4-alarm fire up the street that had to be extinguished immediately, whatever the cost. Our need for fast action on climate deterioration requires devoting the resources necessary to radically shorten the development cycle for not just the project I outlined, but for all carbon reburial projects that have big, sure, quick-fire prospects. We now have the same type of emergency as when a dam starts to crack, when its managers immediately draw down the reservoir that threatens to wipe out downstream towns. We must draw down the CO2 from that accumulation overhead. Our ability to avoid a human population crash will be compromised if economies become fragile, or if international cooperation is lost via conflicts. Then we could be quickly tripped into catastrophic crop failures and food rights. With global waves of climate refugees and a new inability to act effectively, we must avoid trapped. We in the United States can start the cleanup ourselves with wartime priorities and set a good example for others to follow. International treaties will now take too long to negotiate, as will too much coordination of efforts. I would give the job to the Pentagon's DARPA, the agency that funded the development of the internet, one of America's big gifts to the world. DARPA would likely assemble a design team of scientists, engineers, and architects at a suitable location, keeping them there for several years until prototypes were working well and mass deployment could be contracted out. To conclude, people ask me if I am pessimistic about our prospects. Not really. I'm optimistic about the capture and sink technology. I'm even optimistic about the speed of deployment of it, all provided it can be organized in time. Aye, there's the rub. In the U.S., climate has become a taboo word. In the political party now controlling all three branches of the federal government, most state legislatures, 32 of our 50 governors, that's known as deeply entrenched, and our planning must work around that status quo. Some of those leaders worry about property values, that they might take a hit if the word climate was spoken aloud. Several Southern governors have already tried banning their state employees from uttering the climate word, not to mention global warming. Now the taboo is spreading to the federal agencies, and the government's scientific web pages are being censored. But let us stop and recognize that the situation might turn around. I mean, once those politicians acknowledge extreme weather's implications for traditional conservative concerns, agriculture, a robust economy, and being seen as a stalwart protector of the country. They will grumble about other countries not paying their fair share, but hopefully their voters will insist they nonetheless get moving. Emissions reduction and sustainability are still important for the post-cleanup world, as still essential educational projects. I recognize that a lot of the better informed people are now emotionally invested in aspects of emissions reduction, but now is the time to treat them as sunk costs. Emissions reduction has already accomplished wonders. Just look at the solar panels, the wind farms, the electric vehicles. They have recently become cheap enough so that standard economic imperatives will ensure that their progress continues as we switch to cleaning up CO2. So let us declare victory and move on. Move on to the more pressing matter. You should consider redirecting most of your civic efforts to insist on quick climate repairs and restoration, lighting a fire under each reluctant politician, one at a time, not waiting for the next election. They are too entrenched. Replacing them is a long, drawn-out process, and we no longer have enough time for that strategy to play out. Try flattery. Remind them that the political leaders who can pull off the emergency cleanup are the ones that will be remembered as the same kind of geniuses who pulled off the American Revolution. Try letting them take credit for inventing the big cleanup project. If you think that appeals to the big picture will wind up on your leader's back burner again, pick something more specific that ought to be a hot button issue for their voters. For rural districts, talk about agricultural disruptions from random weather. For urban districts, emphasize power failures during mega heat waves. Mention economic crashes trapping people when they cannot sell their homes and move away because of the high mortgage rates that result from partial economic collapse. You must avoid ending up in your leader's same old mental trash can category. You must avoid saying, "I told you so." Never mind the usual sustainability and environmental arguments this time. However true, they will distract from the shorter term focus on extreme weather, something that we ought to be able to agree on despite our other differences. As Lincoln said when the Civil War ended, "With malice towards none, with charity towards all," I'd add, with firmness about the facts, with dedication for preserving the civilization that our forebears created for us at such costs. We're called upon to act as heroes, and it's not just your country that needs you this time, it is the world. We're standing on the shoulders of those 300 generations of ancestors from around the world who built the civilization in which we live. We must not lose their creation via a horrendous population crash. A great CO2 cleanup by 2040 can provide a sense of heroic achievement for everyone involved. Go and be the hero this present world needs. Thank you.